Hey everybody, I'm Mark Staton, and welcome to our discussion on AI in marketing. I'm really glad you're here. I'm excited to talk to you about what we're talking about at the university around AI and marketing, and then also to sort of share a little bit with you about an exciting thing we have coming up this year for the first time. It's called the Certificate in Digital Marketing and E-commerce, and we're going to talk about that at the end. So without any further ado, let me get the screen share up here and I will start talking. Okay, here we go. So you all, looks like y'all can see that. That's great. Okay, so what just happened? Sorry. um, There we go. Sorry. Okay. Okay, everybody. So this is our talk today on AI and marketing, and so we're going to take you through. We're going to sort of take you through the agenda, do a little introduction, who I am. We're going to talk about sort of the history of AI and machine learning, as well as sort of newer things that have happened in those areas. We'll talk about the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in marketing today. We'll talk also about ethical considerations. We'll go over some of the pre-submitted questions that people had when they registered. Then, like I said, we'll do an overview of the Certificate in Digital Marketing and E-commerce program. Then we can do any additional questions and conclusions. What I would ask is that on the sort of the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A function. Please, by all means, put in your questions there. I probably won't answer any until we get to the end, but I'm happy to answer any questions that people have at that time. All right, without any further ado. Okay, so in terms of an introduction, who are you? Who is this person that is talking to us right now? So again, my name is Mark Staton. I've been a professor at Western Washington University since 2012. I primarily teach digital marketing, as well as the Principles of Marketing class for the undergraduates, and then marketing strategy in our MBA program. I did my PhD at the University of Washington. I got my MBA at Boston University, and then did my BA at the University of Virginia. Prior to my MBA, I worked in tech. I worked for some internet companies, and then I'm also doing consulting here with companies in terms of digital marketing. And then additionally, I'm pleased to say that this year, in 2025, I'm completing a textbook to be published by Cognella Academic Publishing entitled A Framework for Digital Marketing Management. Finishing that this spring, and it will be published in 2026. All right, so enough about me. So when we talk about AI and machine learning, a lot of people know the terms, but they don't really know where they came from or necessarily what they refer to. So I found this on a blog by IBM, and it does sort of a nice job of talking about sort of a lot of the things that we're talking about now have actually been around for quite a long time. So artificial intelligence, we'll go into in the next slide, we'll go in a little more data timeline around that. But that first sort of came into thinking around the 1950s. In the 1980s, we had the idea of machine learning, AI systems that learn from historical data. And then in the 2010s is when we sort of got the terminology around deep learning. This is also when you probably you remember these IBM ads from the 2010s about big data, things like that, or analytics. And now, obviously, the last couple of years, there's been a lot around generative AI or Gen AI, where sort of using AI to create original content. So specifically, what is artificial intelligence? IBM defines AI as technology that enables computers to simulate human learning, comprehension, problem solving, decision making, creativity, and autonomy. So the timeline I think of in terms of sort of AI and then the marketing uses of AI, sort of the first definition the first thinking around AI was something that came out of a British computer scientist named Alan Turing, who came up with what was called the Turing test. And he basically said computers are eventually going to get to a point where when we're communicating with them, we don't realize we're communicating with a computer. And he came up with that idea in 1950. Also, Alan Turing is one of the guys that was like part of the Enigma project. So he's like a super, super smart guy that helped code break the Nazis. So there's a really good movie about him with Benedict Cumberbatch. The term artificial intelligence was first coined by an MIT professor who's now still alive, an emeritus professor at Stanford named John McCarthy. And he defined AI as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. And in 1956 was the first artificial intelligence conference it was at Dartmouth University, or excuse me, Dartmouth College. So then in 1959, MIT, you hear MIT a lot when you talk about AI. They founded their AI lab in 1959. And so, again, this has been around for a long time. I thought this was kind of interesting, like a real big groundbreaking moment in artificial intelligence was at the Stanford AI lab. They built an autonomous shopping cart in 1979, and so and then you sort of think about how much of what we're doing now around AI is around sort of autonomous vehicles. It really starts with this autonomous shopping cart at Stanford. And then 1995, a robot car drove from Munich to Copenhagen and back, and was at times was, since there was some autobahns there, it was at times it was hitting 120 miles per hour. And so that was 1995. But like the first really impressive consumer application of AI, in my opinion, is the Roomba. If anyone's used a Roomba, we have a Roomba at our house. It's pretty crazy. And it basically is doing what these autonomous vehicles are doing. So, taking in this visual information and then learning how to get around. And so that was released in 2002. I didn't get my first Roomba until a couple of years ago, but they've been around for a long time. Another thing that we sort of everyone uses but doesn't really realize is AI is Siri or any of these sort of voice assistants. And so Siri, it's funny because like the new iPhone is all about sort of Apple intelligence or sort of talking about AI, but Siri's been around since 2011, and that's a big part of what AI is. And then obviously the big thing that everyone's got super into was ChatGPT, which was released in November of 22. All right, so we talked about AI, sort of what's machine learning. So machine learning is training an algorithm to make predictions or decisions based on data. And so one of the things I always talk about in my classes is, excuse me, and this is no offense to any statistics classes that anyone might have taken in college or at Western, but the really good stuff is the predictive analytics. So, you sort of start with these sort of descriptive stats about like means and modes and medians, things like that. But what's really interesting is when you do things like linear regressions or logistic regressions, where you can basically take a bunch of independent variables and then figure out what their relationship is to the dependent variable. And so in a lot of ways, what machine learning is basically sort of creating the algorithms without necessarily human figuring out about what the IVs and the DVs are. And then sort of the next step with that was deep learning, which looks at data sets and figures out for itself what should be the IVs and the DVs. And then sort of deep learning allows for full natural language processing. So again, when we think of sort of regressions or predictive tools, we think of independent variables, we think of data, we think of numbers. But what machine learning is and deep learning is able to do is basically take words as the IVs and then make the DVs sort of what they expect the right output would be. And so again, allowing for natural language processing. So the next step that everyone got super excited about is this concept of generative AI or Gen AI. So Gen AI is a machine learning model that's trained to create new data. So think about that again. So like if machine learning is about sort of taking existing data and then coming up with the sort of predictive analytics, on its own, what Gen AI does is basically look the data and then create new data. And again, we have to think about data as this very broad term, different than just numbers. It's words, it's content, it's images like this one. So it generates more objects based on the data it was trained on. That's what the gen part is, the generative part. And so what made ChatGPT and DALL-E so interesting, and we'll go into that a little bit about them later, but basically their entire data set was the internet. So and then we'll talk about other sort of reasons why it's pretty cool. But when I was putting together this this deck, I was sort of looking for interesting images that were created by DALL-E, and this was made in August of this past year. And apparently just the prompt was, I want a picture black and white etching of a cat in a street in Tokyo, and this is what came up. So one of the first or one of the questions that was submitted was by Bruce, and Bruce asked, best practices, utilizations of this type of marketing, which I thought was, that's what we want to talk about today. Good job, Bruce. So one of the things that I always refer to, particularly in my MBA strategy class, is something that's called the CMO survey. And this is run out of the Fuqua School at Duke. One of their professors named Christine Moorman, has this big, collection of chief marketing officers and asks all these questions a couple times a year about, how are they implementing X, Y, and Z. And so in the spring of 2024, the CMO survey asked about 300 or so senior marketing, VP and higher marketing leaders at US for-profit companies to rate how AI has improved marketing outcomes. And so what I thought was super interesting about this was that the use of AI led to gains in 3 specific areas: a 6.2% increase in sales productivity, a 7% increase in customer satisfaction, and then a 7.2% decrease in marketing overhead costs. And that's one of the things I always tell my students is, like, particularly in a B2B situation, you're essentially anything that you're really trying to sell to another business, what your main positioning will most likely be is, if you use our tool, you will reduce your costs or you will increase your sales. And so the fact that both of those are hit through AI really talks about the sort of the importance of AI in marketing moving forward. It will help both in terms of sales productivity and in terms of decreasing marketing costs. Additionally, it helps in customer satisfaction, which I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think. I think a lot of people feel like customers wouldn't necessarily like to know that they're interacting with AI, but the fact that basically what this survey said was the companies that have invested more in AI have seen this increase in customer satisfaction after a little bit of time of using it. So specifically, here's the thing. When people think about AI in marketing, generally speaking, they think in terms of content creation and then content personalization. And in fact, that's what most of, those were sort of the most common ways that marketing or these CMOs said that they were using AI. 52% said they were doing it through content personalization. 49% said that there was content creation. But then what was really interesting was these uses did not necessarily result in the highest return on investment. What they found was that higher ROI was found through things like optimizing content and timing. Figuring out, when to put the content out there and how to make the content a little better, not necessarily, starting it from scratch. Predictive analytics for customer insights. I'm going to come back to this concept a lot. That sort of using AI and machine learning to really sort of uncover some customer insights that wouldn't necessarily be available for humans to look at is a huge, huge tool for marketers. Related to that is target market decisions. 31.7%. And like I said, we'll talk about that in a little more detail later. Conversational AI for customer service. I can't say I've always liked it, but I will say that there have been times when I have used a chat bot and I actually feel pretty well served. And I always come back to when I think about that, I think back to, okay, Alan Turing was right. The Turing test is basically has been proven. We've now passed the Turing test when you deal with a customer service chatbot. Enhancing data analysis and reporting, again, uncovering insights like that, and then deepening customer segmentation. So what you really see is that while most people think of sort of AI and Gen AI in particular as this sort of content creation thing, it's more about sort of optimizing your current content and then figuring out how you can learn more about your customer base through AI tools. So additionally, like I mentioned, I teach the digital marketing class here. And these are just some of the topics that we cover in the course that I have seen a lot of AI use cases. So in terms of search engine optimization, a lot of the keyword tools that Google or SEMrush or whatever would have, or Moz has, a lot of them are using AI to come up with sort of optimized keyword lists. Voice search basically uses machine learning, so understanding how it's sort of collecting the data is really important and really effective. And then technical SEO. There's a lot of talk about how AI can basically let you, come up with a website by just going to ChatGPT. But another really important tool is to basically go through and figure out, okay, where are the hiccups in our coding that are keeping us from ranking higher in search engine optimization, and AI can help with that. Pay-per-click, ad tech, smart bidding. I've got a lot of students or former students that work in PPC, and they talk about how they don't really do the bidding anymore. They let the AI take care of it. And so understanding that part. Related to that, sort of audience segmentation, as opposed to sort of what a lot of these, particularly the paid social tools use now, is instead of sort of saying, okay, we want women 45 to 54 who live in these zip codes and follow these accounts. What often is happening now in paid social is you basically say, this is our offer. Who do you think would be interested in this? And then AI tools will then sort of, figure out what that audience segmentation should be. Predictive analysis, again, sort of figuring out, okay, what is more likely, which keywords are more likely to result in conversions. AI is used for that, as well as sort of AI ads creation. So there are AI tools for coming up with these sort of PPC campaigns. Social media, automated publishing, you sort of figuring out, okay, this is what we want. This is the kind of content that we want, kind of going from there. Sentiment analysis. This is a huge tool in terms of, basically market research and brand awareness and sort of brand acceptance. And so understanding sentiment analysis is sort of looking at the internet and seeing, are people saying positive or negative things about our firm? And AI, and because obviously the internet's super big, AI can be really good at figuring out where, what the sort of the current sentiment analysis or the current sentiment around our firm is. Analytics and A/B testing. Test automation is pretty great. One of my favorite things I talk about in my class about A/B testing, which is essentially, instead of sort of asking your boss, hey, which email should we send? You go and create a little test and kind of go from there. Excuse me. And what you see a lot of these tools use is they will sort of create, help you create the tests between version A and version B of an email, send it out to a little bit of a list, and to some subsample of your list, and then automatically send, sort of then figure out which is the higher converting version, and then automatically send that higher converting version to the rest of your list. And then in terms of e-commerce, I mean, let's be honest, we've all seen a lot of AI when we go to our various e-commerce sites. Those recommendation systems, there is not a person that's like, you know what, Mark Staton likes sneakers and books. Let's just send him stuff like that. There's a recommendation system that's sort of doing that machine learning and sort of doing the predictive analysis and figuring out, okay, which sneakers and which books is Mark Staton most likely going to buy. Again, chatbots we were talking about before, virtual assistants. That's it's done all the time, as well as price optimization. There's one of the things that is. I was just joking with some of my other marketing classes about the fact that it used to be that if you went on a plane, you could pretty much guarantee that of the 200 people on a plane, there's 200 different prices. That's sort of price optimization. Price optimization is pretty much in every single category now because of AI. Where are we? All right, cool. Doing great. Okay. So obviously a lot of people ask about what are the ethical use of AI and machine learning in marketing. And so in my research, what I have found sort of the three big things that people care about are talking about a lot is transparency, bias, and data protection. So in terms of transparency, we're basically sort of wanting people to understand when AI is used and also how it is being used and, in making these sort of decisions. Bias. I mean, one of the things that I really try to explain to my students a lot is algorithms are created by people. And so even AI is created by people. And so making sure that you're sort of seeing that bias isn't coming into play based on sort of what the data is saying is really important. And then speaking of data protection. So the two big laws that people need to know about in digital marketing are GDPR and CCPA. And I'm kind of embarrassed right now to say that I can't tell you what GDPR stands for specifically because it's probably in German, but it's basically the EU's laws around data protection and sort of data privacy. A lot of the changes that basically all the things, every time you go to a website and they ask you to accept cookies, that's because of GDPR and the companies being like, hey, you know what? If it can be kind of a pain to have a different sort of setup for Europe versus the rest of the world. So we're just going to make everybody accept cookies or ask whether they want to accept cookies or not. So that's GDPR. CCPA is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And so California actually has a very specific law as well. And of course, the other thing that's interesting about this is like, these are laws. And so, I always sort of think about the difference between ethics and laws. Laws, you kind of have to, you follow laws, but then ethics are kind of what you want to do with them. But or ethics are sort of beyond laws. It's how do you think is the right way to do something. So understanding that data protection part is a big part of sort of the ethics moving forward. And an interesting case study is a company called Unilever. A lot of people don't know what Unilever, when I bring up Unilever in my class, they don't know what Unilever is, but they certainly know about Dove, Axe, Ben and Jerry's, Q-tips. And so it's a huge company headquartered in Europe, huge consumer packaged good company. And they have done some interesting stuff around specific policies developed at the corporate level, at this sort of the C-suite level about how they are going to ethically use AI moving forward. And so the first one, pretty hard to argue with this. Any decision that would have a significant life impact on an individual should not be fully automated. That's a policy. And I like this one a lot. We will never blame the system. There must be a Unilever employee accountable for any work developed by AI. And then the last one, I think, sort of comes back to some of the other things we were talking about. We will use our best efforts to systematically monitor models and the performance of our AI to ascertain whether it maintains its efficacy without bias. So that means that you're always, AI should not be in marketing a set it and forget it tool. You always need to be sort of referring to it to make sure it is doing what you want it to do ethically. So fortunately, so when people signed up for this, and thank you all the people that have signed up and are attending right now, we asked if there are any sort of specific questions that people had about AI and marketing, and we got several. The first one wasn't really a question; it was a comment. Paul wrote when he registered, quote, "Questions historically have not been passed on. Rather, preference has been given to questions by those physically in the room. Thanks anyway." Well, guess what, Paul? We're answering the pre-asked questions, and there's some really, really good ones. All right. So Marge asked, what AI technology, tactic, or technique will work best in the current consumer market, enterprise, or B2B market? So I'm a little biased because I think the most interesting part of marketing is target market decisions. And I think the use of AI generally, but specifically machine learning and deep learning to sort of uncover customer segments is going to have the biggest impact moving forward. I imagine, using your sort of existing CRM platform and then some sort of, off-the-shelf machine learning software to look at it. And then you can realize, hey, there's this market segment that we didn't even realize existed that we've been serving. We need to sort of develop this more. And so I think that is something that I think is really exciting. It's just sort of this uncovering of market segments. Good question, Marge. Sandy asked, how can one detect the level of AI used in ads? So firstly, let me say from sort of a personal anecdote standpoint, after ChatGPT came out, I became a very good ChatGPT detector in student assignments. I don't want to give it away too much because I might have some future students in this webinar, but it's pretty obvious when ChatGPT is used in terms of text, at least in terms of the stuff that I've been seeing. In terms of the text that, how can one detect the level of AI used in ads? Well, sometimes it's a question of does it look right? As good as it's gotten, there is still a fair amount of, quote, hallucination that comes out of Gen AI. But that said, I have heard described this, quote, AI look in terms of images, and it's kind of like, it's sort of the light is sort of dramatically oversaturated. The characters have these sort of impossibly shiny faces and hair. And so like you can sort of see that. But what's really interesting is last year, several advertisers, including Coca-Cola, you all saw that holiday ad that said developed by AI. The ads themselves were developed, and then they actually said to, they made it clear to the viewer that this was developed by AI. And on the one hand, people really hated that Coca-Cola ad, and they really complained about it. But on the other hand, people were talking about a Coca-Cola ad for the first time in like 20 years. So I do think that, from an ethical standpoint, you are seeing lots of brands sort of, identify the work that they're doing as being created by Gen AI, and then sort of dealing with the backlash. But then also, I imagine there's going to be sort of less backlash of that moving forward. Michelle asked, how do you see AI being used for creating user journeys currently? And this is a great question. And so I think the real value of this would be using data from sort of your customers to optimize your the user journeys. So I teach in my digital marketing class the concept of conversion rate optimization. And so that's basically looking at every sort of step, in sort of the promotion and getting someone to a website, getting them, what they're doing on the website, and seeing if they're actually converting, and then figuring out, okay, where are we losing too many people? I mean, you're obviously, and so that's conversion rate optimization. And what I could see AI happening in the not too distant future is essentially like self-optimizing conversion rates. So basically saying, oh, like sort of create back to that idea of sort of automated A/B tests, sort of figuring out, okay, you know what, this isn't working right. Sort of creating the tool being used to sort of see where people are being lost in the user journey, and then sort of self-correcting. Pretty cool. Good question. Ben asked, how should we prevent AI from amplifying social biases? So it's really important, like I said a few minutes ago, it's really important to remember that people create algorithms. And so, and that AI, people create the algorithms that sort of start the process of AI and machine learning. I read a paper recently about the use of chatbots in mental health counseling. And when I saw the headline, I was like, this can't be good. And guess what? For the most part, it's pretty good. And you think about the people that don't have access to regular mental health care. These programmed AI chatbots have actually been able to really help some people. That said, sort of further segmentation of the data, they really found that there was some bias and lack of empathy, particularly for people of color. And so the key is to follow the policies of companies like Unilever and really remember that a human needs to be auditing the outputs as much as possible to sort of figure out where the bias is and then figure out how to correct it. Great question, Ben. I forgot to say who did this one, sorry. What potential consequences do you foresee with mass adoption of AI usage in marketing? All right. So the good news, I think marketing will be more efficient and more targeted with reduced costs, yay, and reduced headcounts. So that could be kind of scary. Reduced headcounts. That doesn't sound great. It does remind me, though, to bring up another movie about computers from a while ago that came out a few years ago. There's a movie that came out a few years ago called Hidden Figures. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it as well. And so it's the story of African-American women in Virginia. My father's from Virginia, so I like Virginia. Who in the 1950s were, quote, computers. Not a lot of people realize this, but the term computer was actually coined to refer to people who were usually women who computed mathematical calculations for the scientists. And so what this movie is about sort of the true story of these women and sort of the prejudices and the racism that they dealt with within NASA and how they overcame them. But there's one particular scene that I really like that I've thought a lot about with the rise of generative AI and all these other tools. One of the main characters is sitting in the lounge, and a lot of her women or her coworkers are super anxious about the fact that that NASA is buying these big mainframe computers. These big mainframe computers that are going to put them out of jobs, the same way that people are talking about AI. This woman, she sort of nodded and was like, yeah, no, this will be tough. And the next scene is she goes to the public library, she checks out a book on how to code, she reads the book, and she keeps her job because she learned how to use the electronic computers. So that's what I would, I'll sort of come back to this in my conclusion, but in terms of the potential consequences, reduced headcounts, yes, but it also allows for sort of increased opportunities for people who are willing to teach themselves how to use these specific tools. All right. Suzanne asked, what are the best free AI image generators? And I found this best free AI image generator. Leonardo is great for AI creatives on a budget. It has a comprehensive free plan that gives you ample generation credits at a fast speed. It doesn't have a free post-generation editing tools, but I would imagine that if you're caring about AI image generator, you're probably pretty good at Photoshop. And that's one of the things that sort of back to the prior question about how to sort of notice if something is AI generated. In one of the articles I read, it basically said that what is used often is sort of AI, DALL-E or whatever is used to create an image, and then the designers or the who are using it will actually put it into Photoshop to make it look less AI or to edit it a little more. And so Leonardo AI is the best free AI image generator according to CNET. Rose asked, what is your greatest concern with regards to AI and data privacy for marketing purposes? Great question. Something we haven't talked about yet, and this is the thing that most, if you really look at the sort of what's the biggest trends in AI in 2025 articles, there's a concept, sort of the next step after Gen AI is what's called agentic AI or an AI agent. And so where Gen AI requires pretty detailed prompts, meaning humans still have quite a lot of control over it, agentic AI would basically be, hey, AI agent, book me a trip to Europe with hotels, flights, and some excursions. And so then it would then be able to go to all these different websites and actually make the arrangements on its own. So again, Gen AI is basically just sort of creating something based on this other stuff, where agentic AI is really, this sort of personal virtual assistant beyond just content creation. So that's pretty cool. But what really makes me nervous, and what makes a lot of the people that have been studying sort of AI next, is this collection of data that is going to be sort of put in one particular place really makes you susceptible to cybersecurity attacks. And so I do think that the collection of data that's used in AI could make for security breaches that are that much more sort of scary and egregious than what we currently have now, which is like, oh no, like, a couple of numbers have been taken and you kind of have to deal with that. Where with this agentic AI, that sort of the data collection stuff could really be lead to some serious cybersecurity issues. So that's what I'm most concerned about is sort of what, how companies that use agentic AI are going to sort of protect the data that they collect. All right. And finally, Max asked, is there a way to market a building? And you know what, Max, I got a great option for you. It's called the Certificate in Digital Marketing Management and eCommerce. So what will you learn in this? You'll learn web analytics. You'll learn conversion rate optimization. You'll learn search engine optimization. You'll learn paid search, content marketing, paid social media, organic social media, email marketing, fundamentals of e-commerce, direct-to-consumer platforms, retail media, selling on Amazon, marketing with AI, what we've been talking about, but at a much sort of deeper, longer platform, and marketing analytics. So how will you learn this? It's 12 weekly online live video classes, kind of similar to what we're doing right now. It starts February 5th, and it'll be Wednesdays from 6 to 9 p.m., ending on April 23rd. Included in that, you'll be getting certified in Google Analytics, inbound marketing from HubSpot, SEMrush Academy, which is a sort of leading SEO platform, and then Amazon ads. What else will you get? You'll get entrance into the community of thousands of WW alumni currently working in the digital marketing field. I've been teaching this class, the digital marketing class, since 2013, and there's a lot of people that have taken this class and are now working in the field, and you'll be part of that community. The last day will actually be an in-person networking event, sort of a collection of all the people in the class, other people that are sort of affiliated with the program, so to really sort of get your sort of career started with that. And additionally, speaking about careers, This is going to be part of the reason why this is this talk is co-sponsored by the MBA program. Is our fantastic MBA career services person, Carmel Emery, will actually do personalized one-on-one career advising, working with the students over the course to sort of come up with a plan on how to, how to promote their new skills and look for new opportunities. And you'll actually be able to work with Carmel and her team for up to 4 months after the program ends. This is great. How do I sign up? So, we'll put this in the chat, but this is the website to sign up. The cost is $2,000, but we've got a special deal for alumni, staff, and students for $1,500, and a payment plan is available. And then, whoa, $2,000, $1,500, that's a lot of money, right? Well, yeah, it is. But if you think about it, the value you'll be getting out of your career, it's a pretty great deal. I would not be surprised if someone who did this program for $2,000 or $1,500 gets a new job after this program or gets new clients after this program that is way more than $2,000. So the ROI in this program is going to be really high and very quick. So I think it's a really good deal. You'll get the networking, the career services, the live instruction, and you'll get a certificate of completion endorsed by Western's College of Business and Economics. It's a really great program. All right, so wrapping it up. In conclusion, AI isn't coming, it's here. It's already here. And you all need, if you don't want to be scared of it, you need to keep up to date with all the new changes. It's so much more than content creation. It's really about sort of understanding every step of the marketing process. And it's about making marketing more personalized and more efficient. All right. Thank you. Any questions? All right. I'm going to stop my share right now. And then I'm going to pull this up. And I'm going, oh, I got 5 questions. All right. What do we got here? All right. Hey, there's Paul. Other than having more data, more RAM, and faster processing available, how is AI different from data-driven processing as commonly understood? Or is the use of data scraped from the internet more data the main defining component? I think you answered the first part. Whoa, that looks weird. So that looks weird. Okay, I just lost everything. Okay, hopefully you can still see me. That's a great question, Paul. How is AI different from data-driven processing as commonly understood? It's all the things that you've basically been talking about. The first thing, again, like you said specifically, the data scrape from the internet is the main defining component of Gen AI. Machine learning is really about sort of coming up with its own algorithms based on the data that you have provided, its own analysis from there. And then, this agentic AI is really about sort of being able to go to different sources as opposed to one data set, or, to really, or as opposed to with Gen AI, which is sort of taking the entire internet as a whole, being able to sort of look at things from an individual basis. That works really well. All right. So I'm going to close that one. Done. All right. Paul, does AI ever get it really wrong? And what are the methods used to validate AI results? Yeah, it gets it wrong all the time. I remember at one point, I asked, no, I didn't ask this, but I had a student write was very cognizant of this, but she wrote she had ChatGPT write, and this will sound goofy that when I say it, why is Mark Staton such a good professor? And the thing that was hilarious was it basically found me on LinkedIn and found all the stuff that people talk about me on the internet. But I would say a good 40% of the stuff was wrong. It talked about my time working at Nike. Never worked at Nike, but it was so definitive that I worked at Nike. I was like, maybe I worked at Nike. The ChatGPT said I did. So it gets stuff wrong all the time, which is another reason why we as the humans have to audit the results. General data protection regulation. I knew that. Thank you. It's not in German. It just looks like what they used to call old East Germany. That's great. Have you ever used generative AI in the process of consulting with small businesses? If so, how did it help or improve anything? I have not personally done that. I do know that I've had a lot of students that have worked for various agencies that have, and essentially what generative AI is able to do is sort of help with scale. And so one of the things I've always said about the internet, about digital marketing, I've said this for years. One of the things there's a million things that are awesome about digital marketing, but one of them specifically is it makes small companies, it can make small companies look big. And I think that generative AI can be really good in terms of sort of creating content at scale. But then again, you need that extra set of eyes to look at things to make sure that everything is what you want it to be. So good job with that. What is the name of the certificate again? Just missed it. It is called the Certificate in Digital Marketing Management and eCommerce. So let me try and figure out how to post this in the chat.
I just did, Mark.
Oh, sweet. Thanks. Awesome. So we got the landing page right there. So it's going to be a really great program. Like I said, it starts in February. It's going to be 12 weeks. You'll get a lot of really great skills. So Bryce, I hope to see you in there. And then Brian asks, as AI begins to create content that is consumed by the next level of AI, how does this now create a death spiral to the center? That's a great question. So the one of the things I like to do in my class is I actually have them do an assignment where they actually have to they use ChatGPT to write a blog about the future of digital marketing. And what's interesting is the students do it and they're all like, wow, this is pretty great. And then I go, okay, now read everybody else's blog. And what they end up seeing is just how, first off, it just looks like all of theirs looks pretty much like everybody else's. You'll see this a lot on LinkedIn about sort of prompt engineering. And my whole thing is that to get really good output from generative AI, you really need to iterate the prompts over and over and over again to get them really good. But then like, I don't want to be a schmuck about it, but like, if you're going to have to do that much sort of prompt engineering or prompt optimization, shouldn't you just create it on your own? And so I do think that is something that hopefully we'll get better at that, Brian, but also just it's something we all have to do. We all have to be on the lookout for it. There's that. And then Suzanne, who I think asked one of the questions before, I had to step out for a minute, missed it. Can the certificate be obtained online or is it in person only? Great question. It is a online synchronous program. So you will be logging into Zoom and Canvas on Wednesday evenings. There is the opportunity if you can't make a particular day to sort of work on that. But for the most part, it is an online program, except for that one last in-person networking day. I don't want to talk about COVID too much, but I got pretty good at teaching this, similar type of class through Zoom and online. Digital marketing is a topic that actually works pretty well through Zoom. Okay, so it's 4:49. Unless anyone's got any more questions, and I'm happy to hang out if people do. But thank you for your time, and hopefully you learned a little something about AI. Hopefully you learned a little something about marketing, and hopefully you learned a lot about the Certificate in Digital Marketing Management and eCommerce. And I hope to see a bunch of you register for the program in the next few days. Take care. Have a good night.
Mark,
Bye.
Katie had a question.
Oh, what's up, Katie?
She said, do I need experience in marketing or working with AI to get the most out of the certificate?
Definitely not. This is going to be for all levels. I could see this being a program that is equally valuable for current undergraduates as well as chief marketing officers or business owners. Understanding how I will explain to you how marketing works through the lens of digital marketing, and so I'm happy for all sorts of people to get a lot out of this. Good question. Thanks, Katie. All right. Hopefully, y'all saw that link to the certificate program. All right. So unless there are any other questions, I guess we'll just kind of wrap this up. Have a good evening. And like I said, I hope to see a bunch of you enroll in the certificate program starting in February. Take care. Bye.